Exercise intensity. We all love this topic, but most of us get it wrong. And even when I'm working with clients, it's really important that myself as a coach have to keep reinforcing these fundamentals to ensure my client and athlete is working at the right intensity so that they get the adaptations necessary to enhance their performance. Because the gains we get post sessions are so tiny and incremental, if we train at the wrong intensity on subsequent days, weeks, months, we can end up hitting a plateau and staying there, or going backwards, especially if we accrue fatigue and overuse injuries from going too hard and going too hard too often. Now, where do we want to be training on the intensity scale? I'm going to tell you. Down the bottom, low intensity, so low heart rate, low rate of perceived exertion, so imagine that as a 0 or maybe your resting heart rate. And then at the top, up to the scale of 10, say, if it's rate of perceived exertion, or your maximum heart rate, which could be anything from 170 right through to 200 beats a minute or more. Unlikely to be much more though. So, that is our intensity scale, low to high. As we go up that intensity scale with our intensity of effort, there is going to come a point which is going to coincide roughly with about 70 to 75% of your max heart rate, maybe a 4 on the RPE scale, up to a 5 max, and generally speaking it's conversational pace, as many people like to say. This is where we want to be doing the majority of our work, in this training zone here. Pretty easy, eh? But the problem arises when people start going too hard too often, so going out of that zone for sustained periods of time, or it might be that during those sessions where they're disciplined for 80% of the time, but the other 20% they actually went too hard. So they've actually negated all those positive, or most of those positive training effects that would have occurred had they stayed down here. So what's so important about being down here? Well, hopefully you can already see from the chart that we're metabolizing far more fats when we work at a low intensity compared with carbohydrates. And that's all because we've got more oxygen available to meet the demands of the effort. So low effort means there's more oxygen in abundance, which can then be used to metabolize fats for fuel. Now, fats rely on more oxygen, but they give out far more calories of energy. So for every gram of fat, you get 9 calories of energy, compared with carbohydrates, for every gram you get 4 calories of energy, in simple terms. The other important thing to remember is that fats are metabolized within the mitochondria in all our muscle cells, heart cells, even cells of the eyes. There's a lot of activity that goes on in these eyeballs. So when we are actually working at the right intensity, burning fats in the mitochondria with an abundance of oxygen, that is the stress that the body's getting. That is the stimulus. We keep repeating that stimulus in all our training, never going above the threshold, that first lactate turn point. So we're staying conversational, staying 70 to 75% max of our maximum heart rate, around 4 to 5 on the RPE max. As long as we stay there or below, that repeat stimulus tells the body, right, clearly this person wants to be efficient aerobically and at burning fats to get more energy. So what does the body do? It creates more mitochondria. Those mitochondria become far more efficient. The body starts creating more red blood cells to transport more oxygen, because remember, it needs more oxygen to metabolize those fats for fuel, for energy at those lower intensities. It creates more capillaries in all the muscles to take that oxygen into the muscle cells, as well as other nutrients, and taking byproducts out, which all magnifies what we're trying to enhance and utilize. People don't appreciate that a stimulus, a training stress on the body to force an adaptation to get fitter, doesn't have to be hard. There are times to go up here, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but the majority of work has to be down there for those reasons I've given you. Not forgetting all the other countless great training adaptations that happen when we're down here. as I've already identified, but also we get increased enzyme activity and other byproducts down here that all allow us to become more efficient at utilising fats, and that for us means that we start to see greater power output for a given effort, quicker pace, so many positive adaptations. And guess what? It's all conversational stuff, just like me talking to you now. So, what else is important to understand down here? Well, clearly, it's all about burning fats compared with carbohydrates. But if we don't warm up properly for that exercise session, we can potentially prevent ourselves from having as an effective session as it would have been. And I've talked about warm-ups in a separate video so you understand that more. But as I alluded to, it's also important that during that session that we stay beneath that first lactate turn point, that we stay at the right intensity. Because if we do go up, we start drawing more from carbohydrates. We start creating more of an oxygen debt because we don't get as much oxygen to meet the higher demands of exercise intensity, and it takes time to repay that debt. So if you spend 5 minutes going above that lactate turn point, so maybe going up to 80-85% of your max heart rate or higher, when you then do come back down, it's going to take time for your body to shift back into fully being aerobic and metabolizing more fats in comparison to carbohydrates, which is why I'm always strict and trying to ensure the discipline in clients and athletes and yourselves watching this video today, so that when you do go and work at this intensity where it's your goal to stay at a certain heart rate or beneath it, then you're going to do so. Now, I've been very general when I've said, conversational pace around 70-75% of your max heart rate, because that's going to get you into a ballpark figure. When you work with a coach like myself, I'll be analysing your data and I'll be trying to encourage you to look at it as well between the times when you communicate with me, so that you can actually refine that given intensity to make it more beneficial for you. Because when we talk general, it is general. When we get the data, so our average heart rate for a given pace, for a given power output, and then we look at the subsequent changes and adaptations to the body. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Is it staying the same over a certain period of time? That is when we then start making those adjustments with time. For a novice athlete, those adjustments are going to be more regular. For a seasoned athlete that's used to training year on, year out, then it might take a little bit more time to ensure that the correct changes are made based on the fact that they might not see as many sudden changes as a novice with regards to their improvement in performance. But for the long haul, over the long period of time, so we're talking year in, year out, this is what matters most. 80-90%, as I say in the peak performance training, peak performance pentagram, this is where your training needs to be, down here. So, going upstairs, going into the high intensity. So clearly as we go up the scale, we're recruiting more muscle fibres, more type 2 muscle fibres, because we're going harder, we're becoming more anaerobic, so we're utilising all of our oxygen, but there's not enough to meet the demands of the intensity. But more importantly, we're burning more carbohydrates. Those carbohydrates are typically coming from the glycogen stores in the muscles and the liver, and our body can only store enough for about 2 hours max of higher intensity work. So we're talking 1,500 to 2,000 calories, if we're lucky. So, as we go up, we're a ticking bomb when it comes to carbohydrates. And for endurance athletes, it's important to be able to manage those glycogen stores with topping up on carbohydrates if it's something like a middle distance or a long distance running events like a marathon or into a sort of middle distance triathlon for Ironman. We need to properly manage where our intensity level is and our carbohydrate intake to make sure we spare glycogen, because as that ticking bomb is ticking and we spend more time up here, those glycogen stores are being depleted at a rate of knots, compared with working low intensity when we're super efficient at burning fats. We can go all day, night and into the next day and beyond, because our body, even the most lean athlete looking at all his 6-pack, 8-pack, whatever you want to call it, even they have an abundance of fats readily available as an energy source. So, lactate turn point number 2. So this is where our max steady state is. So if you're going to do a proper FTP test for an hour, this is the max power you can hold, max pace you can hold for 45 minutes to an hour. It coincides with where your lactate production is becoming exponential. You can no longer cope with the amount of lactate your body is producing due to the high intensity of effort, because of all the hydrogen ions as a byproduct of anaerobic respiratory processes, so the lactic acid system metabolizing the carbohydrates, no longer in the mitochondria. This is where we're metabolizing carbs, glycogen in the cytoplasm of the cell. So it happens very quickly with less oxygen. So that is why when we go up here, we're not able to sustain it for anywhere near as long as down here, but also we create more fatigue on the body. Fatigue in the muscles and fatigue due to the depletion in our energy source to maintain that intensity. So that is why when we go here, we have to have our glycogen stores topped up so that we can perform when we're up here. We need to be recovered, so we need to rid the fatigue again so that we can perform optimally when we go up here. And guess what, guys and girls? We don't go there very often. And I always recommend to do the majority of your time here. And if in doubt, stay here and never go there. Because the adaptations you're making down here, especially if you want to be an endurance athlete, this is what matters most. When you've got a good grounding and a good understanding of pace and holding this intensity, and you're getting all the right adaptations, then you can start looking at going up here and firing the bullets. That, people, in a nutshell, is the intensity of training. So just to recap, down the bottom, what are we getting when we work beneath that first lactate turn point? We're getting increased mitochondrial density. The mitochondria are becoming more efficient. We're getting greater oxygen transport because we've got more red blood cells, but also more capillaries are being laid down and much more enzyme activity, which allows the metabolism of fats to happen in abundance. When we go up here, we're getting adaptations in our anaerobic respiration system, so the lactic acid system. We're getting boosted glycogen stores because we're using them. And again, we're getting increased enzyme activity that is relevant to the processes that are happening up here, as well as the increased recruitment of muscle fibres, particularly type 2, to ensure we can sustain the pace and the effort and the output for that higher intensity. In between, so if we're working kind of, as most people would be familiar, zone 3, there is a time and a place. This is where we might start to do some race pace intervals towards a middle distance or a full distance Ironman, because the interval intensity up here might not be as relevant that close to the event. I'm not saying it isn't relevant, but typically when we're becoming more specific towards an event goal, we start to work more towards the intensity that might meet the demands at that particular event. But that does not detract from the fact that the most training you're going to be doing all year round is down here. And when you're going to go hard, you're more likely to want to go right up to the top, so around 85 to 90%, depending on how well trained you are. This is where those intervals are going to be at, or above. That was 13 minutes. If you stayed with me that long, well done. I've got nothing else to add on intensity of training. Hopefully this has been informative for you. Please look at my other videos that touch on this topic, and look forward to anything else that I put out in the coming weeks. Train smart, be awesome. Bye for now.